the Goth Writer. I hope all of you are feeling well and you're surviving the lockdown and the quarantine somehow. I wish everybody all the best in the first place, and I'm sure we will get through this somehow. Well, we have to. For me personally, my life doesn't change much when I am in quarantine because I'm an author and we also basically are always in quarantine. We just spend most of our days alone staring at our computers and writing, sometimes staring out of the window. That's also counts as work for people like me. However, so yeah, being separated from everybody else is nothing new for me. However, of course, the situation is a little bit different for all of us, and I know many out there are suffering, so I hope all the best for all of you. But let's talk about writing. And today I'm going to talk about the difference between the first person and the third person perspective in a book, in a plot. Before we start, of course, first of all, some self-promotion. As always, I am very, very excited and very proud to share my latest book cover with you for my book Behind Blue Eyes. Behind Blue Eyes will be out in May, and it's a cyberpunk noir story, and I'm so excited about it because I've been working on this book very, very hard, and this is the cover. And I think it looks really cool, and I'm very excited, and I hope you like it too. Good. I will talk about that later in another video once the book release is coming closer. For now, let's talk about first person versus third person. So first of all, the definition, of course, is relatively easy, right? I mean, first person is telling a story from the first person, from the perspective of a character. So you're talking in the first person, talking I go there and do this and so on. It's always I, as the character refers to themselves in the first person. So what you are doing is you are telling the story completely through the eyes of one single character. You as a writer basically become the character, and so is the reader. For the reader, the first person is probably the most intense experience they can have because they feel what the character feels. Well, of course, it's your job to make them feel what the character feels, but that's basically the intention behind that, and that's also what makes the first person narrative so great and such a great storytelling tool. When you use the first person perspective, you can do that in the present tense or in the past tense. Both is possible. The present tense actually is perfect for the first person because, as I said before, you experience the whole story from the perspective through the eyes of one character. So it means when you write it in the present tense, it happens right now. What the character sees right now, what he experiences, what happens to him, the reader experiences it right now with him. So the first person perspective makes everything more personal and more intense for the reader, and making it in the present tense will magnify this. So using the first person perspective, I would always recommend to do it in the present tense. Of course, you can also tell in the past tense if you like from a first person perspective, but then it's a little bit different because the character tells a story they experienced. So the character already has lived through the story. The character is at another point in their life now. So the character tells a story as it happened from their perspective. It's not happening now. So that's a little bit different. It is similar in a way to the omniscient third person. I will talk about the omniscient in a bit. That's something you should consider when you start developing the story and start writing. First person, should it be present tense or past tense? Are we going to live through the adventure right in this single moment, or is it something the character has already experienced and is telling us from their perspective in their way, which gives us or the character also the possibility to tell things as they experience it, not necessarily as they really happened, because you know how it is when you tell a story that it lies in the past. You very, very rarely tell everything exactly as it happened. Especially we writers, we always like to change little details, make it more interesting, make it more funny, or we love to say that we said some very intelligent stuff, which of course we didn't say in this moment because we're not as smart as we like to be, and so often in the past, once something is in the past, you think, oh yeah, well, I should have said this and this. So that's how you tell stories in the past tense. And that's also something you can do for your character in the book. So now let's continue with the third person. The third person perspective is, the definition also is easy, told from the third person. So we tell a story like, he went to the grocery store and he realized there is no toilet paper. That's how we tell a story in the third person. So we also usually use one character, which is the protagonist, and we tell the story from the perspective of this character, but not like in the first person exactly through his eyes, through his thoughts and everything that happens. We are like a camera sitting on his shoulder. Like, I like playing video games. If you know what I'm talking about, there is the first person, mostly shooter, where you really are the character and you just see the hands. And then there is the third person, which is very often used, for example, for RPGs, where you actually see the character running and the camera is on his shoulder or behind them. And that's how you experience the story. You still experience it to this character, but you basically watch them. It doesn't mean that you can't add the thoughts of this character when you write in third person, not at all. It is very, very common to do so. You can do this and you even should do this, otherwise it might be difficult for the audience to have the connection with your character you would like them to have. So you can tell from the third person and still go into the thoughts. And you write, when he went through the supermarket and saw there was no toilet paper, he thought, oh my God, what am I going to do now? Okay, that's really very bad writing, but that's just an example. So you write the thoughts like he thought, which you basically don't need to do in the first person because everything is in the mindset of the character you're writing about. So this is the third person. And there is also, as I said before, the omniscient third person, which is similar, of course. I mean, it's also in the third person, but there is an omniscient narrator, kinda. It's like if you tell a story about people and something happened to them and you tell the story, you are the narrator, you know everything what happens. When you tell the story, you know more than the characters do. And that's the biggest difference, in my opinion. When you write in a normal third person, you and the reader at this point where the story is now only see and know as much as the my puppy only know and see as much as the character does right now. Whereas with the omniscient narrator, you know the whole picture. So As an example, let's stay with the toilet paper story. The omniscient narrator in this case would be, he went through the supermarket and searched everywhere but couldn't find toilet paper. What he didn't know is that a new delivery was about to arrive. So you see, this is the omniscient narrator. In this case, the omniscient narrator jumps in and says, okay, this guy is looking for toilet paper. He doesn't know. No, he leaves the supermarket, the poor fool, and doesn't know that the delivery is right on the way. Very dramatic story, of course, but that's basically the big difference. So the narrator knows what will happen at any time and can basically jump in time while telling the story. Very prominent examples, for example, Stephen King likes to do that a lot. He mostly writes in the third person, but very often has an omniscient narrator and has stuff like he went through the door and didn't know that his life would change forever. That's something you only can use in an omniscient narrator. You can't use that when you use the third person narrator because, of course, the character can't know what will happen when they go through the door. So this is a decision you should make before you start writing the book. Do I want to have just a third person, just looking over the shoulder of somebody and watching what is happening? Or am I kind of like the narrator or God of this world and know exactly what will happen and sometimes put in some clues what will happen in the future, like foreshadowing and stuff like that? So you basically always have the control over everything, and that's the most classic examples are the old fairy tales where you have, and they lived happily ever after. That's actually an omniscient narrator who will tell you that, because the characters at the moment can't know if they will live happily ever after or if the dragon will eat them next morning. But the omniscient narrator knows. So that's a big difference. I personally, when I write the third person, I prefer the omniscient narrator because that's a very nice possibility to bring in so-called foreshadowings. A foreshadowing is something where you hint at something that might or might not happen. And foreshadowing, I can talk about that in another video when thinking about that now. It's a very, very nice tool to create suspense. Also, when you plan to bring in major plot points and big surprises for the reader, it's always a good thing to have a foreshadowing. So it isn't just bam and you think, oh, what the hell happened here? Why? And no, you think in retrospective, oh yeah, sure, there was this and this and this and this leading to that. So one of the best examples, and that's a movie, The Sixth Sense. You probably all have seen The Sixth Sense. If you haven't, you should. It's a fantastic movie. But so at the end we have this bam, this huge surprise. Oh my God, this guy is dead. But in retrospective, when you look at the whole movie, you see that there have been so many little hints, so many foreshadowings, that it's absolutely logical and you just have been blind not to see it. And a very good storyteller will make you blind not to see the obvious, and then you will see it in retrospective. So this is about the third person omniscient. You shouldn't mix it up. I believe you should stick with one and stick to that. You can change the perspectives of characters, no matter if it's third person or third person omniscient. So you can have a multi-plot if you like, or tell the story from the change between two characters or something, and always stay on their shoulder, the camera on the shoulder, or stay the omniscient narrator and switch perspectives. This is something you can't do in the first person. Well, you can. I mean, there's nothing you cannot do as an author, but I think you shouldn't. It doesn't really work. When you decide to tell a story from the first person through the eyes of one person, I believe you should stick to that and don't change the character perspective in the middle of the story. And please don't change it from first person to third person. I think that's very confusing and it doesn't really work. I wouldn't recommend that at all. There are people who can do this, there are people who can do everything, but I wouldn't do that, to be honest with you. So these are the two big differences. I think both are very, very can be great stories if you tell them well. It doesn't matter. If you're a writer's beginner, if you're maybe writing your first novel or planning to, or for now only have written short stories and now you want to write something big, I would always recommend to start out your first book as with the first person narrative, because the first person is really the easiest to write. It is a very effective tool. As I said, it will bring the reader very close to your characters, and it is definitely the most easy thing to write. You will get into your character, you will kind of become this character, and you just imagine what he is living through, what he's experiencing, and you describe what he sees, what he thinks, what he does at the exact same moment. And you can also follow his chains of thoughts and everything. It is the easiest, trust me, really the easiest way to write a novel, and also to write a long story of 300, 400 pages. The easiest way to fill pages is the first person perspective. So that's something I would always recommend. I personally, of course, because I was stupid when I was young, I started out with the third person and a multiplot. And then later on, after I have written and published a couple of books, I wrote a novella, which was the prequel to my series, which I have published back in Germany. And this prequel I wrote in a first person present tense from the perspective of a young girl. Kind of a little bit like a diary. And when writing it, I said, oh my God, this is so easy. This is the easiest thing I have ever written. It's fantastic. Why have I never tried that before? I don't know why, but you should do it if it's your first book. Trust me, you will have a much easier time. And later on, you still can create a very nice third person omniscient or multiplot, whatever you want. You still have time for that, but it's always better to start out in the first person. And there are many, many fantastic books which are written like that. So don't think that because it's the easiest to write, it's simple or trivial. Not at all. I mean, you can write a fantastic book like that or crap. So for example, The Hunger Games, I've been talking about this book before because I think it's a very, very good book, very well written. It is written from the first person perspective. So that brings us very, very close to the character, and is still, the author is capable of creating the whole big world and telling us all the details of this world only through the eyes of one character. So yeah, definitely something I would highly recommend to do. First person, third person omniscient. That's basically the three big directions you can take with your book. And so I think that's basically it. That's most what I have to tell about in this short time. My books are all of them third person, and as I said before, Shadow City is a multiplot. However, my new book, Behind Blue Eyes, coming out is third person, but mostly from the perspective of one character, switches between two or three others, but only occasionally, but it is mostly one character, and it is an omniscient third person, because I personally like that very much. However, no more no more self-promotion for today. If you like this video, please sign up to my channel. I will have some awesome trailers pretty soon for my new book, so stay tuned for that. And besides, of course, I will make another video next month and talk a little bit about writing and give advice as I did this time in the last 2 videos. So I hope you have some fun, and I see you again next month. Thank you very much.